Hello everyone, I am Charlie Biddle, and today I will be discussing the cannabis legalization movement, what it is, when it began, why it developed, how it is impacting the US today, and its contribution to the field of ethnic studies. This movement is a complicated one, and I'd like to start by mentioning that there are two sides: those who support the legalization of medical marijuana and those who support recreational marijuana. Now, the difference here is quite important, and although the support for recreational cannabis is so popular, those in the medical field do not hugely support their campaign. In an article outlining cannabis legalization ballot initiative campaign contributions and outcomes, which ranged from 2004 to 2016, states that as of November 2018, medical cannabis was legal in 33 U.S. states and recreational cannabis in 10, mostly enacted via ballot initiative. Now, the demographic data collected by the Journal of Health Politics concluded that the results underscore the importance of health advocate participation in developing cannabis legalization frameworks. In another article written from a scientific and public health perspective, contributing authors like Taylor Andrea Lynn, PhD, and Rhonda Finney, RN, argue that advocacy groups claim that smoking cannabis is a safe and effective treatment for various psychological and medical conditions, even though cannabis is not approved for such use by the Food and Drug Administration. This political movement began in California in 1996 when voters passed Proposition 215, making it the first state to legalize medical marijuana. An article by CNN reminds readers that the movement to legalize has accelerated since 1996. Americans have increasingly supported legal cannabis, and legislatures have taken up the issue more often in recent years. The article goes on to state that in 2022, President Joe Biden pardoned individuals convicted for simple possession under federal law and ordered a review of marijuana status as a Schedule I drug. Schedule I drugs are known under federal law to have no legitimate medical use. Why did this political movement develop? Scott C. Martin writes in his article for Time magazine, "In general, people suffering from a variety of ailments ranging from glaucoma to social anxiety may, with a physician's order, procure marijuana to alleviate their symptoms." Martin describes the Controlled Substances Act, which established categories or schedules into which individual drugs were placed depending on their perceived medical usefulness and potential for abuse. This was passed by Congress in 1970, and cannabis landed in Schedule I, along with heroin and LSD. How has this movement impacted the United States today? In a poll conducted by the South Dakota Polling Project in March of 2023, 747 registered voters answered questions about political figures and policy questions of concern to South Dakota citizens. The article details factors like voter turnout and how these numbers may affect the possibility of another push to legalize recreational marijuana in South Dakota. 49% of those surveyed said they were strongly or somewhat in favor of legalization, whilst 41% said they were strongly or somewhat opposed. This article also points out the distinction between political parties. About 71% of Democrats are favorable towards legalization, whereas only 23% of Republicans are favorable. In an effort to reclassify marijuana at the federal level, advocates for marijuana legalization hope a federal regulatory shift could eventually change the minds and votes of some state policymakers who have been reluctant to embrace weed. This decriminalization of marijuana would allow for free from the law, growth, distribution, and consumption of cannabis. Georgia has allowed patients to consume low THC cannabis products since 2015, but until last year, there was no legal way to buy them. 8 dispensaries are now selling the products. An article by the LA Times claims that marijuana was one of the rare things that could bring relief if patients could get it. This statement alone goes to show that this has been a long-fought battle. And it all began when California's Proposition 215, titled the Compassionate Use Act, passed and set in motion a historical cultural shift throughout the country. I believe that this movement has contributed to the field of ethnic studies because it deals with topics like discrimination, decriminalization, and political freedom. Political movements like this one allow for the formation of new political parties, groups that organized over the same need for change. Whilst it is important to utilize one's freedom of speech and freedom to protest, a person must also consider the ramifications of doing so. I myself am an advocate for the legalization of both medical and recreational marijuana, but after some research, I can definitely see the argument being made against legalization. I believe that if the opposition has scientific evidence to back their claim that marijuana does not entirely aid ailments, but the raw chemicals that can be extracted from cannabis, like THC and CBD, do provide benefits, then maybe those advocating for legalization should rethink what exactly they are fighting for. It is one thing to enact change for the betterment of those suffering from medical conditions, but it is an entirely different argument to push for something recreational if it does not appear to provide any benefits to the individual or the whole of society. In a great article written by Charlotte Resing, Resing describes how the cannabis legalization effort is also a racial justice issue. The first sentence of the article outlines how marijuana has been a key driver of mass criminalization in this country, and hundreds of thousands of people, the majority of whom are Black or Latinx, have their lives impacted by a marijuana arrest each year. Though this article was published in 2019, that does not downplay the impact that racial disparity has in relation to marijuana possession and criminal charges. Part of the reason I chose to discuss this movement in particular was so that I could research this factor of the movement. I was curious to see how many advocates for legalization were concerned about the racial aspects of their efforts. Resing goes on to say that we must remember that if we legalize without righting the wrongs of past marijuana enforcement, we risk reinforcing the decades of disproportionate harm communities of color have faced and endured. This is a tremendous point that should not be overlooked by either the advocate or opposing sides. If we so choose to fight for the legalization of either medical or recreational use of cannabis, then we should have the foresight to know how to deal with whatever consequences shall arise.